everyone, and welcome to another episode of Business Fusion. I am your host, Philip de la Vega, and I'm joined by my co-host, Carlos Raldiris. Today, we're continuing our series of middle market companies, and today we're going to be covering marketing, and we are honored to have as a guest, Drew Allen. Welcome, Drew.
Afternoon. Thank you, guys.
Great to have you here.
Drew. Drew is a tremendous asset as far as marketing knowledge and analytics and all that. Drew, give us a little background on your experience, where you've been, what are you doing now?
Sure. So actually, I didn't start out my career in marketing. I graduated with a degree in MIS and went to work for Accenture and spent 6 years doing that, traveling around. It was great training, but ultimately decided it was not what I wanted to do. Loved the problem solving, loved working with the clients. It was much more of a heavy coding focus, if you will, than what I decided I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so went back to business school, got my MBA at UT down in Austin. And during my time there, started to take a lot of marketing and strategy courses and really just kind of fell in love with the discipline. And so decided to go intern at Frito-Lay, worked on the Doritos brand strategy, got an offer, had a great summer, fell in love, knew this is what I wanted to go do and spend the rest of my career doing, but decided to go a little bit of a different route and went to work for Walmart in their corporate headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. They were in the midst of really kind of over-tooling their entire department as well as the brand. That's when the whole the brand transformation really began for Walmart. And spent 4 years there at Walmart doing private brands, working on private brands, doing some other strategic communication work, and then left there and went to go work for Coca-Cola for 6 years. Spent 6 years at Coca-Cola doing marketing, and then have been for the last 3 years at a boutique ad agency in Fort Worth, where we specialize in mid-market growing companies, predominantly doing digital marketing for them, as well as strategic branding, positioning, et cetera. And so I'm the chief strategy and customer officer there now, and I lead all of our strategy and account service activities.
Wow, that is very robust experience when it comes to marketing. Definitely Fortune 500 and then on to middle markets. Fantastic. Yeah. So
I think he's a good guy to have on the podcast.
Well, I think we'll have him more than one time.
We'll see about that, Carlo.
It sounds like he knows one or two things about marketing.
And that's what we want to sharing. We want to share with some of the audience and our viewers and listeners. So Drew, give us a little, I guess, I've been known to manage a couple of marketing and sales teams in the past, but I know that marketing has changed a lot over the last even decade. Never mind, if you got an MBA 20 years ago, right. Digital marketing was not even a thought.
Right.
Give us a little background on how have you seen marketing change over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I would say the last 10 and certainly the last 5 have been really unprecedented compared to the last 20 in my experience. When I left Accenture, I was doing programming, and it was I came from a very technical background. And when I left Accenture and kind of left that career behind, I thought really all of that was gone out the window. I would never use any of those skills anymore. I was going into marketing, which was just on the other side of the ocean from technology, if you will. What I didn't realize at the time is how much those two worlds were going to converge, how rapidly it would happen. And now, really, the best marketers out there are marketers that can think strategically, have that classically trained background, can think through the different frameworks, but also are not afraid of the technology and willing to get into the technology and understand the technology. In my opinion now, you really can't be a great holistic 360 marketer without understanding the technology from an SEO perspective, from a paid search, social, et cetera. The platforms have changed so much on how you reach your consumers and ultimately get the best ROI out of every marketing dollar spent that you really have to understand the technology to be a great marketer today. And I would say 10 years ago, that wasn't true.
Yeah. So really marketing has truly evolved from, I guess, just the creative portion of it like let's say back in, I don't know, Mad Men, the show, right?
Right.
Of just being creative with a great logo and whatever not, to actually being a lot more analytical because of the different touch points that consumers have and with using today's technology.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. The days of sitting around and just, dreaming up of ads and drinking scotch in the office, I guess that's what they did on Mad Men, but I can tell you that's not what's happening inside agencies anymore, for sure. You take a look at agencies now across the board, the good ones, you've got great creative teams and strategy people, but, we employ PhDs in astrophysics, data scientists now. And who would have ever thought those people would have existed in the world inside of an ad agency 10 years ago? It just wasn't, that just wasn't part of how you went to market to win from a marketing perspective. But now they're totally integrated. And it's really changed the dynamic of the industry.
I'll tell you what it reminds me of, back when I was, just getting into human resources as a profession. I shifted over from operations and so on. I had the pleasure of working with a marketing team. I was an HR VP for a big marketing team for a publishing company that did a lot of direct marketing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they sort of lived and died by was data, right? But we made very clear distinctions between what I'll call the creative side of the marketing function and the analytical side of the function.
Right.
A little later on in my own career, when I got into a fast-moving consumer goods company, and it was all about the brand, those two, what I'll call disciplines, kind of came together, right? What you needed in a brand person was someone who not only had the creative, but also had tremendous command of the business and of the data.
Right.
And I'm curious, I want to learn a little bit more about, some of the data that is, fueling the work that you do nowadays. Back in the day, on the packaged goods side, it would have been Nielsen data, it would have been IRI data. What are some of the data sources that you use today to do some of your work?
Yeah, so the Nielsen and the IRI are still very applicable. In fact, I've spent quite a bit of my time in the last 3 years encouraging my clients to make sure that they're subscribing to some of that data, because that can be incredibly powerful as well. I've seen clients that have come in and have said, we're growing 30%, we're doing fantastic. But the question is, well, how fast is the category growing? Because the category is growing 60%, you're actually losing share. You're underperforming. And so understanding how your competitors are going to market and how well they're doing, and you're doing vis-a-vis your competitors, that is still very much relevant. And platforms like IRI and Nielsen are great for illuminating that for brands and for our clients. Inside that, though, certainly the data now that we get inside of, for instance, Google Analytics, it's telling us so much more about consumers, both from a demographic and a psychographic perspective, that candidly marketers never had access to. And now it's literally, you just open it up and there is a treasure trove of information around who's buying your product, who's interacting with your ads. What can you learn about, again, as I said before, not only the demographics about where they are, but also the psychographics. What do they care about? What else are they interested in? And for the marketers and agencies that are paying attention to that data, that's been an incredibly powerful tool to not only be much more surgical in how you're targeting those consumers, but what you're saying to them that is going to resonate with them as well. So we spend a lot of time inside all of those platforms, learning as much as we can about the consumers that are interacting and buying, our clients' brands.
Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. I imagine that with all of that data, one of the things that you're pressed to try and do is, isolate, key data sets in order to action, what you're doing a bit better.
Right.
Are there some things that you pay attention to more than others?
Sure. I mean, we're actually in the midst now of our agency is building a pretty robust data warehouse, because there is now so much information coming out of all of these platforms that it actually is getting harder and harder to kind of piece everything together. And so we're taking some deliberate steps to make it easier, not only for our clients, but candidly for ourselves as well, to read and understand, the landscape and what we're looking at. But, ultimately some of the things that we're always looking at, conversion rate, click-through rate, all of those different things, session time, duration, all of those things help paint a picture for what's happening in kind of the ecosystem of the marketing that you're doing and how effective you're doing in being that. But the thing that I always look at the most is, your CPA, your cost per acquisition. Because in my mind, if we're driving a low enough cost per acquisition below what the profit margin is for the certain products, then we're in a good spot. And if we're not doing that, then we need to understand why, or certainly at a minimum, then we have to understand, what does repeat rate look like? Everybody knows the customer acquisition costs are always high. They always have been. Digital marketing has brought that down over time considerably. But depending on the industry and category, you're always going to have, no matter what, it costs money to go grab and get new customers. And if we can drive a CPA that's lower than what the profit margin is, that is the sweet spot where we want to be for our clients all day long. And so that's what I care about the most is, can we bring you in if you give me $1, can I give you $1.20 back? Whatever your hurdle rate, your cost of capital is, north of that. And if we can't do that, then we have to understand what your repeat rate looks like, so that we understand what at least the 1 or 2 year ROI, lifetime value, if you will, looks like for that brand or for that product.
On that note, Drew, some of the businesses, middle market businesses, may think that what you're talking about, specifically some of the metrics on digital marketing, are more applicable to, let's say, a SaaS business, software as a service, versus physical products.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true, or do you see them very similar, or are there any differences that you can pinpoint and say, like, no, this is specifically very different?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I came in to the ad agency I work for now, not having any agency experience, my experience had been in CPG and retail, and then kind of across the board with a lot of different companies in consulting. But I'd never worked with software companies trying to help do B2B marketing. And so we work with some B2B clients now. And what I'll tell you is the frameworks are all the same. The frameworks to think about, who really am I targeting, and who am I trying to replace? All growth, as you guys know, all growth comes at somebody else's expense. And whether or not you're selling a software as a service, or you're selling a jar of peanut butter, no matter what it is, it's the same fundamentals and principles, the frameworks, if you will, the segment targeting, positioning, the 4 Ps or 7 Ps, however you want to look at it. Those frameworks still apply from a B2B or a B2C perspective. There are certain channels and things that we're not doing in the B2B space that we're doing in the B2C. So TikTok, for instance, doesn't make sense for some of my B2B clients that are trying to generate leads that turn into $1 million software sale. For instance, that's very different than I'm trying to get somebody to buy a $3.99 jar of peanut butter. That's a totally different thing. And so there are some platforms that make sense and some that don't. So that has changed, and that's different. But the fundamental process of how we think strategically about how to help that company grow and where that growth is going to come from, none of that changes, no matter whether or not we're looking at B2B or B2C.
Some of the, and I agree with that, some of the, let's say, mistakes or badly managed marketing campaigns sometimes. Let me call out a couple of those, and you tell me true or false, agree, disagree. Let's say you.
Okay.
Let's say focusing on eyeballs versus instead of offers. Is that a mistake?
I would say that's a mistake.
And could you explain a little bit more? I agree with you 100%. Why would that be a mistake for some company that is looking at, I want to get a lot of traction, a lot of eyeballs instead of offers?
So candidly, eyeballs are cheap now. Back probably 10, 15 years ago when digital marketing first began, it really was all about getting eyeballs. And now it's much, much more prescriptive. And if you're driving eyeballs, candidly, anybody can do that now. It's very easy to just drive somebody and throw somebody to a website. But what the tricky part now is getting to that lowest part, what people commonly refer to now as the funnel, the deepest part of the funnel I not only want you to come to the website, I not only want you to click on the page, but I want you to go down, I want you to read whatever this is, I want you to click on the video, watch, and then I want you to click buy now or contact me. And so we gear all of our campaigns, if you will, to the lowest common denominator in the funnel as far as you can go. Because really all of those the eyeballs now, those are what we consider and call vanity metrics. Those ultimately don't do very much for your brand. And it's certainly not generating as strong as ROI as you could be by taking a different approach.
100%. Next one, I'll let Carlos chime in later. Let's say asking your prospects for too much info too soon.
Yeah, so that's a very tricky one. And we work with some D2C companies, direct to consumers, and then we work, again, as I said before, with some clients that are B2B, where they're trying to get you to fill out a form so that a salesperson can contact them. And what we've seen is you do have to be very careful around asking for too much too soon. The goal of what you want to do, obviously within your website, within your social media marketing, whatever that is to really drive that engagement first. And what we've seen as well is that, a lot of times the path to purchase, if you will, which 10, 15 years ago was candidly traditionally very linear. It is not linear anymore at all. And what we've seen is many a times with our brands, our consumers will have 3 or 4 different touch points with maybe a search. They see we hit them again with a custom intent, some sort of display ad. Maybe then we hit them again with a social media, something on Facebook. There may be 4 or 5 different touch points before they actually come in and convert. And so one, I think the lesson there is that, you have to understand that it takes all of those things. It's never just one thing. And so some of our clients, may say, well, I just want to be on paid search, or I just want to be on Facebook. That's not a smart way to think about approaching the brand. But also at the same time, if you do something too early and ask them for too much that alienates them, you can miss out on them not coming back and interacting with the brand before they finally make that purchase decision. Most people interact, research, think about before they just see one ad are like, oh my gosh, amazing, I love it, I'm filling this out, click and buy. As I said before, the path to purchase just is generally not that linear anymore.
Just curiously, Drew, is there a generational difference in that behavior? So, for example, do older, prospects, for example, have a bigger issue with that than younger prospects?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that. My suspicion is to say that it is. Certainly, the younger generation is much more comfortable with seeing something on Facebook and going and buying it, or an Instagram ad, or something on Pinterest, and immediately having credibility there that they feel comfortable with that path to purchase. Whereas my suspicion is your older generation maybe is a little more skeptical. I need to see it in the store and touch it and feel it, before I'm gonna buy it. That's my own opinion. I don't really have any data or anything to back that up, but that's kind of my own observations and what I believe is probably happening.
I think for me, what triggered the response is, and maybe it's my age, but I get especially skittish about surveys, about people wanting to track me, or giving them permission to see what other websites I go to. I try to turn all that stuff off, and I wonder if it matters. And what do I mean by that? we have much more control than we've ever had in the past to, tell a company that, we don't want to be tracked. We have, the ability to ask, all the big social media companies to send us the data that they have on us, right? I was reminded the other day by Google that, I haven't been tracked for the last, 4 years. Do I now want to be tracked?
Right.
And so I wonder, does it matter? Or is the technology at a level now that almost makes all of that irrelevant, because in spite of our best efforts to turn it all off, we're still being tracked every step of the way?
What are you hiding, Carlos?
That's probably a different podcast.
That's another podcast, exactly.
I think, I think about, back to your previous question, in conjunction with that thought, the millennial generation, if you think about, they're so used to sharing everything. Mm. I mean, when I was growing up, we weren't sharing anything with anybody that wasn't our friends that we didn't talk about live, and that was it. Now, this next generation, they're so used to putting candidly everything about themselves out in a public forum on Facebook and TikTok and everything else. I think they're just so much more, because of that, they're just so much more used to and accustomed to sharing their data and everything about themselves. Now, whether or not that's a good or a smart thing, it again is probably another podcast. But I think for the younger generation, they're just much more comfortable with, you can track me, you can follow me, you can collect my data, because I'm so used to sharing so much already to begin with.
Okay, so let's do a little mini validation of that point. We got 3 guys in and around the same age on this podcast. I've already said I turn it all off. What do you do, Drew? Do you leave it on? You turn it off? Or are you selective?
I'm selective, and I'll be honest in that I'm probably more the mindset where you're at, but I feel like I have to leave some of it on, because it's also my business. I need to understand what's happening in these platforms. And how they work. And so candidly, I do leave some of the things on because I just want to continue to learn about the platforms and be involved with them. If I wasn't in the line of work that I was in, I would probably be much more skeptical and conservative, for sure.
Okay. Philip, what about you?
I leave a lot of it on, to be honest. I do.
He's an open book.
Got nothing to hide, but so the only thing I don't do, first of all, so when it comes to social platforms and all that, I'm not into everything. I do watch some stuff on TikTok and streams and whatever. I do that. Okay.
Right.
Some of it is funny, and we'll have a conversation about that later. But I don't join the platforms per se, because it would take too much time from me. Right. Yeah. I mean, so I have to be selective. Right. And sometimes, let's say on Facebook, you have all of these questionnaires of what is your favorite color? Look, you're just trying to profile me. I don't participate in those at all. So I mean,
but that's an interesting point in and of itself, because what you're saying is that I'm at least thinking about it. And you said the same thing, Drew. I'm thinking about it. Right. As it's being presented to me, I'm making a decision. Okay, here it's okay. Here it's not okay. Here it's okay. Here it's not okay.
Right.
And it sounds like, that's what we do. And so, going back to your point before, that maybe some of the younger generations are just prepared to put it all out there. In effect, I think it validates your point, at least in this little mini unscientific study we just did.
Look, yeah. The technology and people getting to know your profile is, as a famous cartoon character said, inevitable. It's just, you can't stop it. It is what it is, folks. Yeah. It's more and more they're getting to know who you are. They're listening to you. As a matter of fact, I was going to mention to you that voice searching for digital marketing, it keeps growing 50%. I was listening to this guy Patel, someone from the West Coast, like, yeah, it keeps growing. That's the future. Yeah. For marketing right now. 5G with mobile devices is going to once again change that, because the experience on your device is going to be such that, wow, you could really get to connect with me on real time with the richness of the message that I can't do it unless I happen to be home.
Right.
So all of these things are just gathering information.
Right. Yeah, for sure. In voice is certainly it's growing exponentially. It's still a very small piece of search overall, but it is certainly growing. What's interesting as well is you're now starting to see that people are starting to speak in terms of how they would search. So when they're using voice, they will say, find the nearest McDonald's near me. They use language. They're using language that they would use in a written form now in an oral form. So it's fascinating to see how those two worlds are converging, for sure.
I already had to learn a new language when I was doing the texting thing 10 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
I do. It's a great point, Drew, and we talk often about machine learning, right? That's one of the technologies that has been advancing over the years, and presumably making data more accessible, available to you as well. But what you're talking about is humans learning from machines now, right? I mean, to your point, we're using the same exact search terms in our verbal commands to these little boxes that we keep around our offices and to our phones and so on and so forth. And presumably that's making it easier for the technology to take over. Am I wrong?
I hope so.
You're very fatalistic there, Carlos.
Oh man, I am.
Yeah. Again, this sounds like a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, this is like an X-Files podcast.
Yeah.
It is. But I've been preparing a little bit for another guest that we're having around IT, and I've been looking at some of the technology that is really establishing itself. Obviously, it's AI. Obviously, it's machine learning. Obviously, it's the Internet of Things. But it's 5G. But it's also the kinds of effects that it's having on humans and kind of the choices that we make, robotics, implants, all kinds of things like that are ultimately affecting us. Too much for this podcast, but it is influencing a little bit of my thought about how it could potentially be used from a marketing perspective. Do you see any of these technologies that are in the near future really helping marketers out in the near future?
I mean, it's again kind of my previous point. It's hard for me not to see that those two worlds continue to merge and combine. Since the beginning of time, I think people in marketing, CEOs and CFOs have been asking, well, I'm spending all this money on marketing. What am I getting in return? And that, I think, has been a problem since marketing candidly began. And what the digitization, if you will, of marketing is doing, it's allowing the dollars to be much more closely tied together on I'm spending X and I'm getting Y. And so I think marketing and technology are going to continue to blend and merge and be much more part of each other's worlds than ever before, simply because of the insatiable desire to understand I'm spending $1 on marketing. What did I get for it, and where did it go? And I think technology is the thing that's bridging those gaps and is going to continue to do so.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. Drew, for some of the middle market companies, and I'm referring more towards the younger companies, what advice or points will you mention to them to focus on if they want to build, let's say, a brand, or if they have a product, for instance? Should they focus on the brand? Should they focus on the product?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think invariably every startup, every company that's getting, trying to make it, right, they're focused on selling a product, because they're trying to figure out how to live the next day to go sell the next product. And I don't think that's different really than any industry across the board from any startup that's ever existed. The challenge and the problem, which you're alluding to with your question, is that at some day you grow up a little bit And once that happens, when you're small and you're doing that, you're selling a product, the big players typically don't notice you. They're not looking at you. They don't notice you. Once you move into that middle territory, now you're in a place where you're looking for growth, but you're also on the radar from the bigger players. And if you haven't identified and established your brand, and when I say establish your brand, what I really mean is why it is that you exist, why it is that you're better, and who you're trying to replace, what it is that you're saying you are, therefore you're not all these other things. Whereas when you're trying to sell a product, most people are like, I'll sell to anybody that wants to buy me. I'll say anything they want to say, right? Anybody that wants to buy me, I'm kind of open.
Right.
But once you start to kind of emerge out of that stage, you get into a spot where now you're in a weird spot. You're in that middle tier where if you really want to go source and grow volume now from the larger players, those are typically players with much larger marketing investments. They're working with some of the best brand agencies out there. They've got classically trained great marketers that work for them. They know what they're doing, and now you're on their radar. And what I've seen happen with some brands is that if they haven't done their homework earlier on to really identify this is the target market that we want to go after, and this is what we really want to stand for and separate ourselves in the market, you wind up kind of becoming a brand that means everything to everybody. And historically, those are brands that don't last. So a long-winded way of answering your question, I think that understanding who it is that you are and who you're trying to replace and why you're better than them is incredibly important in defining your brand early and upfront. Because once you get to a certain spot, if you've allowed so many different products to come into your portfolio, for instance, because you never really established those brand parameters, you were willing to launch anything new because it helped with the bottom line. And now you're kind of this thing that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. It gets very, very difficult to grow at that mid stage to take that next step.
Drew, thanks so much for all that great information. It's made me reflect a little bit on talent, right? Marketing talent. It's an area that's obviously near and dear to me. It's how I make my living and so on. So we're going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to do a little marketing DNA factory. And what I'd love to have you do for us is just design the current to the future marketer. What are some of the attributes that they need to have, some of the knowledge, some of the skills, some of the abilities? Go.
Yeah. So it's a great question. When I started running account service and strategy for the ad agency that I work for now 3 years ago, I really changed actually kind of our entire recruiting model. And I quit recruiting advertising majors, to be perfectly candid with you, and started focusing on and only hiring business majors, marketing majors within the business school. And I did that principally because not that there's not smart, talented people in the advertising school, but a little bit to what I was alluding to earlier in our conversation, the future marketer and the marketers that I need on my team to help drive the business are ones that can connect what we're doing in advertising back to the business. They're able to speak about ROI. They're not afraid to get into Excel. They've taken some finance and accounting classes, hopefully a couple of stats classes. And so they're able to, they're marketers. They have a passion about marketing. They love brands. They love consumers, what makes consumers tick. But they also then can understand and relate and tie back to what we're doing in digital marketing on what that's costing. And then if you give me $1, here's what I think I can return from you, Mr. or Mrs. CMO, based on what we're seeing in the data and in business cases, et cetera. And you really need people that have that quant side as well as the qual side. And so for me, that's who I've been specifically targeting on campus for the last several years. It's been extremely successful. For me, that ultimate marketer it's that person who's got the left brain and the right brain, who is coming out with a business degree, preferably in marketing, that maybe has taken an extra couple of statistics classes or has a minor. There's a lot of college campuses now that are doing kind of minor in data analytics and that sort of thing. That's a sweet spot for me. If I can find that talent, that's incredibly valuable. The other thing, that the cherry on top, which I think has been a universal truth throughout time, but it still exists today. If you can actually then talk about and communicate and relate and have a conversation with somebody around what behind the scenes may be very technical and complicated, but distill that into a way that anybody can understand and it's very easy to understand. That is a skill set that is also incredibly valuable, certainly for anyone on my team, but I think is going to continue to be valuable, because the reality is, CEOs don't understand and don't need to understand, quite frankly, the ins and outs of digital marketing and how it works. But you need people that can translate how, when you're going and asking and pitching for that CEO for investment dollars, how those dollars are going to be spent and why there's going to be a strong ROI connected to those dollars spent. And so that's the other part as well. I would say that's the cherry on top. If I can have a left brain, right brain thinker that's not afraid to get into the data and get in that, but that can also actually carry on a conversation with somebody and take things that are very abstract and distill them in a way that most people don't understand. Like that would be your ideal marketer in my mind.
What do you think, Philip?
I think absolutely over the last, it's been longer than that, probably 10 years, maybe even more. The profile of the marketer has gone from not just being creative, but also being analytical. And like Drew says, you need to have a holistic perspective on the business. Yeah. It's not just here's the logo or the slang that whatever the tagline. Thank you. Right. That you come up with. It has to do also, like, are you actually converting with that? Are you creating value? Right. Because at the end of the day, with all due respect to all the creativity and everything else, is can you create sales for me?
Right.
Right. If you can create sales, you're building the business. Right. If you're just, like we were mentioning earlier, it's just getting a lot of traffic eyeballs, but you're not really creating sales. Right. Then you're a cost.
Right.
Right. So I think the profile needed to change and has changed, and I 100% agree with it. We are also want to be cognizant of your time, but I had a quick question for some of the viewers in middle markets. Everybody's aware of SEO, search engine optimization and such, mm-hmm. but what they may not be aware of is some of the influencer marketing, mm-hmm. right? How there is actually people out there that are influencers and how they can affect their brand or product strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's actually something we talk about quite a bit at our agency, because we obviously do a lot of influencer marketing and help facilitate influencer marketing on behalf of our clients and brands. The thing that I'd say, though, is that the thing that I caution our clients the most about and talk about with influencer marketing, there was this wave of every brand kind of wanting to go all in on influencer marketing. Like, if I can have somebody else sell my brand instead of me trying to sell my brand, well, that's fantastic and great, because then it's this kind of third party endorsement. The challenge with that, or the risk of that, is that brands really need to understand when you put too many eggs in a basket, into the influencer marketing basket, if you will, you're really putting your brand equity into the hands of people that are not responsible for either building your brand equity, holding on to your brand equity, or driving your brand equity. And they're not interested or care about that. They're interested and they care about driving their own brand equity. And so you're really losing the reins, if you will, around holding true what it is that your brand wants to stand for. So does that mean you shouldn't be doing influencer marketing? No. But what we've seen is we've had far too many clients want to go all in on influencer marketing. And what we've told them is that's a really bad idea. You don't want to do that. There are some strategic influencers that make a lot of sense, probably for every brand out there, that can do a good job of repping your brand and will do so in a way that is accretive to your brand equity and brand DNA. Mm-hmm. But be very careful and understand, the second you do that, you're handing over your brand to somebody else and it's out of your control to some extent at that point. And that would be the thing I would say, is that we're actually cautioning our clients to not go too heavy all in on influencer marketing, because there's also a lot of risk that comes with it as well.
So to that, I would probably complement it, and I would agree with all the risks you've mentioned, but I would probably complement it saying that the minute you want to do that, and some of the customers may want to go all in, like you say, you better make darn sure your product or service is 100%.
Right.
Because more than giving away your brand, you're giving away the consumer experience, which is what supposedly these influencers do.
Right.
They evaluate your product, your service, whatever it is. So you better have it really nice.
Right.
T's crossed, I's dotted.
Right.
Otherwise, you could really build a brand or kill it.
You could kill it. You're exactly right. And, the other thing that's happening with influencer marketing as well, compared to even just, let's call it 3 years ago, is that, a lot of these influencers now are getting pretty savvy. They've all got lawyers, they've got agents, right? And so,
success, Drew.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, that's a problem sometimes if you're wanting to deal with them. And what we're seeing now is this dichotomy, because of that some of your largest, biggest influencers, they rep so many products that it does start to feel less authentic. And your consumers, even the millennial consumers, are becoming much more aware of, you don't really like that product. You don't really use that when you grill. You're just repping that product because you just rep like 20 other products. And so it's losing its efficacy. And so the dichotomy there is that the bigger ones cost more and are repping more brands, but their reach and their following is massive, right? Which is what every brand wants to have. Well, if I work with him or her, they've got 2 million people following them. But the most authentic ones, the most authentic influencers now are the ones that are small. And so there's this fine balance of, do I work with the influencer that is going to be more willing to work with me on how I want my brand and the brand experience to be repped and used and showcased, but the reach may be much, much smaller? Or do I go in with somebody much larger, but understand that I'm going to pay a lot more and have a lot less control? And so that's one of the other things now that's happening, is that influencers have now become very successful, and it's causing a lot of brands to rethink kind of what their influencer strategy is, because for some of the larger influencers, brands just aren't seeing the ROI there that they were, say, 3 years ago.
Right.
Great point. Look, I got one final question. Philip may have a final question as well. But I always like to get our guests to take out their crystal ball and cast the gaze a little bit into the near future, maybe 3-5 years down the line. What do you see as some of the trends that are going to influence the way that companies market going forward?
I'd say probably the biggest trend I see is selfishly related to my industry, the ad industry, where, as I mentioned before, I started out my career in consulting, and it was a totally different type of work than I do now. But principally, consulting and ad agencies, they do the same thing, which is the creation of value. That's what they're both focused on. Can you create more value for the client over your cost? And they don't really have, there's no assets. The only assets is their people. That's it. There's no machines, there's no trucks, et cetera, no patents. What's happening now is that now you're starting to see a lot of the consulting agencies, Accenture, Deloitte, Price Waterhouse, a lot of them are starting to merge into the ad space. They're buying up ad agencies, and they're starting to play in the backyards that have long and historically been, your traditional ad agency backyard, because they're realizing there's a lot of value there and revenue there, candidly, that they've been leaving on the table for a long period of time. And so what's happening is you're starting to see ad agencies that are coming under pressure, one, from people take things in-house, but also competing from consulting agencies moving into the ad space. Invariably, you have to imagine that ad agencies are going to start trying to move the other way then as well, and move into some of the consulting space and start taking some of that as well. Who's going to be more successful? I don't know. I'd say, certainly that the larger consulting companies are much more well-positioned and primed to move into the ad agency space versus the other way around. But I think you're going to see net over the next, 4 to 5 years, a much more blurring of the lines between what we would have traditionally thought as traditional consulting agency and traditional ad agency. I think you're going to see a lot of players that are coming together and going to market as one, that we can basically solve a whole host of business problems for you, whether or not that's a back-end transformational human resource system that we need to come put in, or we need to launch a new brand campaign to help you remain relevant in the market. I think you're going to see much, much more of that over the next 3, 4, or 5 years. I think it's the future.
Wonderful. I'm keeping my eye out. I might go get my MBA now.
Okay.
in marketing.
One last question for me, Drew. I mean, you've obviously been able to accumulate a lot of solid experience and knowledge, and definitely have had a lot of good initiatives in digital marketing. But we all start out in our early years, going to college, getting a degree, and so on.
Right.
What advice would you have for yourself, for a younger Drew, 24, 22-year-old, starting out, now that you have this type of knowledge?
Yeah. So the team that I have the privilege to lead now, I've got 6 people on my team. They are all in their 20s. So it's actually, I would say the advice that I'd give on this podcast is the same advice I give to the talented people working on my team now. And that is, in your 20s, in my opinion, the most important thing to focus on is your training. It's the most important thing. Are you being developed? Because eventually what's going to happen is, just like the rest of us, you're going to go to sleep and you're going to wake up and you're going to be in your 40s and not know what happened. And you're going to be in a leadership position, and somebody's going to come to you and say, you're now responsible for solving this business problem and leading this team. And that client or that executive is going to look at you, and your team's going to look at you. And whether or not you've had the right training, you're not going to know how to solve the answer. But whether or not you've had the right training is going to show through. There's going to be nowhere to hide anymore. Mm-hmm. And so what I would tell, kind of people starting on their career, don't worry about the money. Don't chase the titles. Don't jump ship from this company to that company just because of that next promotion. Focus on whether or not you're being trained and developed. And if you're being trained and developed, the money, the titles, all of those things will all come later in your career. What you don't want to have happen is get into the mid stage of your career and realize you haven't had that great training, because what is going to happen is you will stick out and you'll stall in your career, and you'll be confused as to why it's happened. And the reality is it's because you kind of chased that shiny penny, if you will, earlier on in your career, versus really focus on getting the right training and the right development. Don't worry about all the fancy stuff. All that other stuff will take care of itself for your career.
That is fantastic advice. I'm going to take that piece of the clip and share it with my kids, because they won't listen to me.
Well, my kids probably, maybe you can talk to my kids, and my kids will talk, I'll talk to your kids. We'll do a value exchange there.
On that, any last comments, Carlos?
No, this has been fantastic, Drew. We really appreciate you coming on. I feel like I've gotten a nice refresher on what it takes to market in the 21st century, and I genuinely appreciate you coming in and sharing it with us.
You bet. Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. It's great you guys are doing this podcast, and again, appreciate having me on. Thank you, guys.
No, it's been our pleasure, Drew. Thank you again for all your time, sharing your knowledge and experiences. We'd love to have you again in the future. I think we can make this another couple of hours of marketing.
At least.
But we want to be cognizant and respectful of your time.
Let's do it. Sounds great.
Well, folks, until next time, I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what else we can cover. And Drew, nice talking to you again. We'll be in touch soon. Until next time, be good and do good. Ciao.
Right. Thank you, guys.